Welcome to It's All Mental, a podcast from Every Turn Mental Health. Mental isn't a bad word. There's no health without mental health. We're here to talk about every high and low, no limits, just good conversation. Hi everyone. In this episode, there is a mention of abuse and trauma. Please stop the episode here if you'd prefer not to listen to this topic. Welcome to this episode of It's All Mental. I'm Emily, I'm the Chief Commercial Officer here at Every Turn. Today I'm joined by Joseph and Monica, who are here to talk to us about EMDR. Welcome, Joseph and Monica.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we deliver EMDR through our talking therapy services at Every Turn Mental Health. And previously we recorded an episode with one of our therapists who explained to us what EMDR is about. Today we're going to get a bit of a different perspective, as Joseph has accessed our talking therapy services and he's had EMDR with Monica, who's here as well. So I think it's going to be really fascinating to get the perspective of someone who's gone through EMDR themselves. To get us started, Monica's just going to explain to us a little bit about what EMDR is all about. So Monica, what is EMDR?
Okay, right. So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and it's an evidence-based therapy that is often used for trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. Being evidence-based means that there has been a lot of research and studies around it that they have proved that it's effective in treating traumas and post-traumatic stress disorder. One of the key features of EMDR is eye movement. Let's say bilateral stimulation. Eye movement is just one way of delivering EMDR, and we're going to talk about this as well with Joseph, because we did the remote EMDR, so we use also different ways to deliver EMDR. And the idea behind the bilateral stimulation is that with EMDR, we go into the trauma memory, we kind of like bring up again to a conscious level, and we help the client to go through that memory, reprocess that memory, so that at the end, that memory loses somehow the power that it has and stop affecting the person's life in the present. So obviously it takes some time to do that. EMDR is made on phases, and we go through different phases. And at the end, what we hope to achieve is that the client is able to kind of like say, I'm able to move on and function and plan for the future. So in a nutshell, somehow this is what EMDR is about.
Perfect. Thank you, Monica. Joseph, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself to get started, that would be lovely.
I'm somebody who I'm biomedically trained. I did youth work for years, and I then retrained as a social worker. So for about 7 years, I was in college and working double jobs. When I went into my profession as a youth worker, I never worked a 40-hour week. I worked a 70-hour week, 100-hour week. And I did that till I was 27. And at the age of 21, I had a major car crash. And from then on, my health just went downhill. And eventually I got a diagnosis of fibromyalgia, which is a complex multi-pain system. And I also had a background of this came out through doing counselling of I had been the victim of abuse for about 15 years. I'm not going to need to go into details about that because that's very private. But what the main out for me was, when you're in pain, you experience fear response in your body. That just anybody in pain gets that. I was getting that in spades, and so when I saw my pain specialist, they recommended ED. I'm sorry if I don't get the
it's completely fine. Yeah.
So so I was recommended it, and I'd researched it for a while, but didn't realise I could get it on the NHS. Put in a referral and started the sessions. The reason I chose it was I'd had counselling, and I wanted something that was very direct and very pointed. One of my major problems is I suffer from night terrors, and I wanted to get a handle on that. And I also wanted to find out how much of my pain was pain and how much was being exasperated by the trauma. And I hadn't really considered that I actually had post-traumatic stress, but through the therapy with Monica, it became very clear that's what I had.
Yeah.
And it became very clear. It's like going through life and doing stuff and not realizing you're carrying a heavy rucksack on your back. And I didn't realize how heavy it was till I started the therapy. My actual experience with it. So I'll tell you what I found like the sessions were like.
Yeah.
So how I would describe it, and I described it to Monica, was having this therapy is not like counselling. It's more like going for surgery. So you have the treatment, you have recovery periods between the treatment, and you also have side effects of the treatment. So if you went and had a surgery for your appendix, you'd have the appendix taken out, but you'd also have a scar and it would also hurt. And I would say by when I had the third session, my pain levels went up, my anger went up, my nightmares went up. And that's one thing I would say about the therapy. It's you have to be in the right place to have it. And I was in the right place. I'd had the counselling, I'd had the support, and then I had this treatment. And as I went through the treatment, I could see a difference developing. I wouldn't say I was getting better. I've still got fibromyalgia, but by the end of the treatment, the nightmares were less. And 3 months after them, I can say I no longer have traumatic dreams. I have normal dreams, which is the first time in my life I've had normal dreams. And I don't wake up with sleep paralysis. So that's when you dream, you wake up and you are still in pain, but you can't wake yourself up. So that's one thing that EDM has provided for me. So that my experience with it was not just only doing the therapy, but being prepared for the therapy and being prepared afterwards. And having somebody like Monica, who was very honest and said to me when I had the sessions, your pain might go up, your trauma might affect you more, but this is part of the process. And by having that honesty, I was able to work through it. And the therapy itself, you're given a safe space that you create while you're having the therapy. And that safe space is you can take away that safe space with you and use that at home as well. And I found that very helpful.
I thought just firstly what you were saying in terms of, I guess, some of those kind of realizations as you kind of started that therapy, or actually kind of even before your journey to having EMDR, was actually around kind of connecting some of those things together and kind of connecting that some of you at the experiences that you were facing within your life, and actually kind of connecting some of those things to some of the things that had happened to you previously. So firstly, I thought that was just, that was really interesting to hear you, your experience of that, and how that kind of played a part in your start of your journey with EMDR. And then also I think it would be really good to hear about the actual EMDR itself, but also I think for people listening who are thinking about EMDR and thinking whether that would be useful for them, it's also, I think, interesting to understand the kind of journey that you went on through EMDR itself, and that preparedness and the awareness. And I remember when we did the previous episode with another one of our therapists, and they were, explaining the kind of more physiological kind of side of actually kind of what happens during EMDR, and that, that process of unlocking a lot of that trauma that's inside of us.
Honestly,
so I think, hearing your perspective of that is...
if I can add something, so the preparation that Joseph mentioned is important to do in EMDR. We have one phase that is actually called preparation, because it's kind of like when you know that you are preparing yourself to go for a long journey. And you don't know whether you're going to find, whether you have to sleep outside, whether it's going to be cold or hot, whether it's going to be really tiring. Or so you need to kind of like metaphorically put a lot of skills on your backpack so that you are able to face these challenges, because the journey with EMDR can bring up a lot of emotions, thoughts, sensory information, physical pain, like you, Joseph, mentioned. And sometimes when if they all come all together, can be very overwhelming for the brain. So that's why we need to kind of like prepare before being able to go to the processing and the desensitization of the memory.
Yeah. And that's very much what happened in the session. So at the start of the session, it was creating that safe space, explaining how the therapy would work. Once you start doing Monica was very clear that there was an actual process of when you were actually in those memories, how to stay safe, but also it's not like narrating it to somebody. You are actually going back into those memories, you are sitting in them. So it's one thing I want to stress, it's not counselling. And I think if you came to EDM thinking it was counselling, you'd be quite shocked. That's why I was saying you need to be prepared for what it is. It's been very good, don't get me wrong, but it was also quite traumatic in the right way. Because what I went through was very traumatic. So if you're involved in a car crash and you break your arms and legs, the surgery you have is going to be very traumatic. If you have abuse or you have something that affects your mind, or you're very frightened, or they've used these on people who have been in battle fatigue in the army, if you've had that, the cure is going to be quite traumatic. And I think for me, having Monica prepare me for that, when it actually then happened, I apologise, when that actually happened in the therapy, I was ready for that. And I think I had a more successful therapy having that. If you aren't prepared, my concern would be people might leave the therapy session 3 because they're so overwhelmed. So I think you need to be in the right frame of mind. You need to have done the work beforehand. And you also, if life happens, just after I had the therapy, I was rushed into surgery for something to do with my stomach. If that had happened halfway through therapy, I would have probably stopped the therapy, because you've got to give the therapy your full undivided attention, and also have a very supportive network. My wife's very supportive. So she understood after I'd had the therapy with Monica, the next day I was a bit agitated, and I prepared her for that. That doesn't excuse it, but it lets my wife know that actually I've had this, I call it surgery of the mind, because that's the way I understand it. I've had this surgery of the mind. I've got to give my brain the time to relax. And one thing that Monica did do that was helpful is she got me to plan for the end of the session. So at the end of the session, she say, are you going to be doing something nice, read a book, going out somewhere, doing something not too mentally strenuous? And that's what I would do. I would have a book on my Kindle or a program queued on Netflix to watch after the session so I could unwind. And I think that's very important as well, that you just, I don't want to scare people off the therapy. Therapy is very good, but it is, you're doing a lot of work. You're doing and it's been successful. And it has been successful. So I think that's my takeaway of it. And one of the things that I found very helpful was, if you go to the media and you look what's being reported on EDM, they normally talk about post-traumatic stress in soldiers and flashing light therapy. That's what they call it. Well, the thing that was helpful for me wasn't the lights in the eyes. I didn't find that, was the sounds in the ears. And had a good pair of headphones, and it was the sounds and the visual cues on the screen that really helped. And I think you can, Monica, you said you can also do tapping as well.
Yeah, and exactly. When we talk about the bilateral stimulation, so the most common way, let's say, the first kind of way of doing EMDR was eye movement, but later on we have evolved, because fundamentally the principle is to try to involve the whole brain, and it seems like doing this bilateral stimulation creates like an opening in the nervous system, and automatically it seems to restart that natural processing system that belongs to the brain, that is already inbuilt but is somehow stuck. So by doing this bilateral stimulation, which can be eye movement and tapping like this, or in your legs, it can be sound like Joseph mentioned. So there are so many different ways that we need to adapt, and I think that's one other good things in the therapy that we did with Joseph, that because of the necessities that he had on different days, we will be able to adapt and be able to still deliver EMDR even though it was in video.
Yeah.
And I think that's something important for people to know, that EMDR doesn't have to be face-to-face. It works really well, even if it's done on video. Obviously, as Joseph said, you have to have the equipment to do it, but the very first condition is like the willingness to go deep into that memory, knowing that it's a journey that is going to be painful but rewarding at the end.
Yeah, definitely. And that all makes sense. And I think, there's lots that you said there. I think it's really, this is what this podcast is all about, is having these good conversations to kind of demystify some of the, some of these topics. And like you said, Joseph, you see things on the media, and that's just kind of a little snapshot of what these kind of things are about. So it's great to understand more about the different ways and how it can be personalized to each individual who could be accessing this service. And that all makes sense in terms of the preparation as well. And that's come across really strongly in what you were saying, Joseph, that you've got to be in the right place, and you've got to kind of go into it knowing exactly kind of what you could experience through the process of it, and both thinking about that psychologically and how you kind of prepare yourself, but also there's some really good kind of practical tips that you offered there around your support network and thinking about after the session and the things that you can do there as well. I think it would be really nice to understand a little bit more around what was the kind of the positive outputs from it. You've mentioned some things there in terms of the night terrors and some other things that it sounds like you've had some really great improvements on, but can we hear a little bit more around the kind of outputs and the results of it?
I think one of the major things you have with trauma and prolonged trauma that's happened over a long period of time is people who suffer from it, including myself, will see someone else who has trauma or hear of another situation, look at themselves and say, well, I wasn't traumatized enough. I've seen the article on the BBC and that was about soldiers in Afghanistan. Well, that doesn't apply to me. And it's coming to the point of actually, it's not about being a victim, but it's knowing that, yes, you were traumatized and it has done damage. And there is something that can help that, not fix it, not take it all away. I still have pain. I still have those memories. I still have the lost years. But the positive is there was something that I was able to physically engage with that wasn't weirdy science. The problem with when you've got a chronic condition is there's so much out there on offer, and a lot of it doesn't work, to be honest, or didn't work for me. So when I came across this, was this may sound strange, but one of the positive outcomes was when we started, wasn't having a therapist or somebody saying, well, this is the magic cure, this will sort you out, this will take it all away. If it doesn't work, you haven't put the work in. It was, well, we've got this process, we'll go through this process, and it will reprogram the brain. And one of the positive things for me, it sounds very unscientific, but I could feel it happening. I could feel the change. And what I mean by that is when we were doing the therapy and the sounds, and again, I'm not going to go into details, but when we were in the trauma, how do I explain? So when I was in the trauma and reliving it through the therapy, and you could hear the sound and you could see the image, I could feel there was something going on. So when the therapy then stopped, and over the next week, whether I had a good week or a bad week, I could know it was doing something. So one thing I did like about the therapy was it built on each other. So you had the first week where you learned the safety, and then at the next week, then you got into the actual therapy and worked through 2 or 3 different traumas. And then you had the finishing of that therapy and preparing to move on. For me, who's very scientifically background, that felt real. And that was one of the things that made the therapy work for me, was it was logical. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
But it was based in science. It's been proven to work, and it worked for me. It wasn't a cure-all, and also I can come back to it. I'll be very clear on this. Unfortunately, my abuse went on for a very long time and was in very developmental parts of my life. And I think there'll be another time where I'll come back and I will have some more treatment, more EDM. And again, that sort of shows that the treatment works, that it can be repeated and you can get the same results. And so one of the positives for me in a roundabout way is that it not that it only works, that it's logical.
Yeah.
So I can say to somebody else, I know someone else that's looking to have it, and I can say to them, because they're not in the right place to have it at the moment, but I was able to give them my experience, say that's okay, because you can have it in a few months. It will still be there. So for me, it's that it's tangible.
Yeah, I think that's really important. It's a really important point because, like you said, there's so many things, available. There's so many things, that are marketed in certain ways, and let's be honest, a lot of what's out there and commercialized isn't always what's the best for people. So I think that's, it's a really important point. And very much part of our philosophy at every turn in terms of what we offer is, it's got to have that evidence base. It needs to be proven, and it needs to be under the right guidelines. Because that's, it's really significant things that we're dealing with here, isn't it? So I think it's a really, really good point. Something else that I'd be interested in expanding on. Sorry, Joseph, is you've talked about your fibromyalgia. So can you tell us a little bit more about accessing therapy with a chronic condition? And I know Monica's mentioned some of the kind of things around being able to adapt the therapy, but can you tell us a little bit more from your perspective, what that was like?
So when I got referred, I went to a pain clinic appointment, and she took a history. And she thought the therapy would be a good idea. So I've had counselling before, and I've struggled to access that because you often have to, I can't drive, so I'd often have to take a bus, go over there, and I'd be too ill to do the sessions. So doing the therapy over the internet was always something that I wanted to do. So the chronic condition made me have to be creative, and thankfully the NHS is offering this. So I was able to, the fact that I was able to even access it with my condition was really helpful. So when I was accessing it with a chronic condition, I was just very upfront with Monica from the start, was, okay, I'm not being daft here. I'll never use my pain or use my illness to try and fob off a session, but you need to know that I might have to lie down in a session. I might have to go and walk around. And it's just being aware of the chronic condition so that it doesn't interfere with the therapy. But what was helpful was that Monica was also aware. Sometimes if you get some therapies, they can just be in a bubble, so they're not aware of other health conditions. Monica was aware and was able to say to me, let's have a plan for your condition. So we didn't have 6 weeks solid. We broke it up, and I explained to Monica that my personality isn't a personality that is slowly methodical and does stuff. I'm a very A-type personality. I'm driven. I do things at 100 miles an hour. Even though I'm disabled, I'm more likely you need me to slow down. So with her knowing that, she was able to help me with the chronic condition by saying, look, you've done 3 weeks of this. Shall we take a 2-week pause? So we took a 2-week pause. Now, the problem with some therapy is you book sessions, and if you take a pause, I know it's on the NHS, but most stuff isn't for therapy, you then have to pay for that. And so it was nice to be able to have that freedom with the condition to take those 2 weeks. And also, regardless of having a chronic condition, having that 2-week break made me also see that the therapy was working. So when I came back with it, I had more confidence to go back into those really quite painful memories. And they still are painful. I'm not gonna deny that, because they were trauma. But I was able then to go back into them with not such a spike in my chronic condition. So it was having the awareness that the condition was going to affect the therapy, but also the condition is partly being caused by the trauma. So using the therapy to support the condition. So I think that's mainly how it affected the therapy. And I would encourage people who have chronic pain and who have had trauma, this is actually good therapy to have, especially if you've got a therapist that's aware, because pain and fear and all those responses are all interlinked. So having a chronic condition, if you then have trauma on top of that, if there's some way you can lift that weight, then okay, your chronic condition isn't going to go away, but it's going to feel a bit lighter.
Yeah, it's going to help you manage it.
Was how I was able to manage it with the therapy, and I was able to have the therapy because of that honesty about it, and the honesty of Monica to say, let's work with this.
Yeah, so it sounds like that flexibility was really important, and I think that will be really useful, again, for anyone who's listening and anyone who's got a chronic condition or, like you said, is experiencing pain. I think that will be really useful. Is there anything you would add, Monica? I mean, there's a few things Joseph said there in terms of that kind of link and integration with other healthcare services. Obviously, the kind of initial recommendation came through the pain clinic there, which again is quite interesting. Is there anything you'd add in terms of kind of how our services and how talking therapies kind of connect into other services?
Yeah, well, in the case of Joseph, I did not have to liaison with the other services, because they were already involved and they were already doing a really good job. So we were already kind of working together. We knew that we were there and working together. But yeah, there might be cases in which we might need to liaison with them and agree how to best support the person, what changes, adaptations we need to make, because there are all sorts of long-term conditions that we work with. So we, case by case, we will need to assess what needs the client have and understand what the client wants. As well in that treatment plan, always making the client aware of the plan we have in mind, because having a holistic approach in treatment, I think, is ideal to make sure that we cover all the important areas that involve the client. So the GP, it can be in that case the pain clinic. So yeah, so it's always for therapists to keep this in mind, and I would say, by the experience of working with Joseph and with other people who have conditions, is just not making assumptions that what works for one person is going to work for everyone. It's really important to ask the person, what do they do for the pain? How do they manage it? What works? What doesn't work? And as Joseph said, to be able to expand the therapy in a longer period of time. So it's not a race. So it doesn't matter if you don't finish it in 6 sessions every week. The important is that you give the person the time, because recovering from trauma is hard. It's really, really hard job, as Joseph said. And rushing it is not what we will advise. And because there are phases in EMDR, and as Joseph said, every phase was based on the first one, on the previous one. So sometimes it might feel like some clients wanted to go straight away into like, let's go to this part because I know it's the one that it works. But just have the patience to go with the therapist and the therapist to learn what is that the client needs. And that implies as well making sure that the resources, the agencies around that need to be involved are involved.
Yeah, definitely. So if I can just ask you, Joseph, you've talked us a lot about EMDR and your experience of it so far, which has been brilliant. Can you just tell us just a little bit more about what you found most helpful with EMDR and your time with Monica?
I think that it was a whole package. That would be, and it didn't just end with the hate this EMDR. When we finished the sessions, Monica then told me what else to go forward. She gave me a few websites. Can't remember exactly what it was, Monica, but you could remind me. But it was, I had some apps I could use while we were doing in between the sessions. They were quite helpful. One of them was just a dot that went across the scene and sounds, which meant you could practice it. She was also very clear to mention that if you're doing it by yourself, you don't delve deep into the trauma. You just use it as a form of practice. But then afterwards, I would refer to mindfulness, which I've done myself in the past, and I would very much recommend that. They do go quite hand in hand. And mindfulness, in a nutshell, is a way of thinking and a way of living, and it can be quite helpful as a follow-on. So the thing I found the most helpful was probably when I came up with the analogy I've used before, which was to see this like a series of small surgeries. And so you have the preparation for the surgery where the surgeon talks about it, you have the surgery, you maybe have a second surgery, then you have the recovery, and then you get back to full health or partial health. And I think that's what impressed me the most with the therapy, was it followed that model. And for me, as somebody who's quite medically based, that enabled me to engage with the therapy a lot more, because I could see a beginning, a middle, and a future. Now, I'm not saying long-term counselling is bad. I had 2 years of counselling before, but the nice thing about this therapy was it has a very set focus, which is to help you with the trauma. And that was the thing that was holding me back. That was the thing that was causing more pain, more fear. And I, probably to end note, which Monica will know what I'm going to say, I am now completely night terror free. And that is something I haven't had for, I'm 48 now, so I haven't had that since I was 12. I had night terrors from the age of 12 till midway through the therapy. So sorry to get emotional, but that to me was the major. Has it cured everything? No. Have I still got the history of the abuse? Yes. Have I still got the memory? Have I still got the consequences of it? Of course. But I no longer have night terrors. I no longer wake up panicked and in a hot, cold sweat. So if that's all it did, that's enough.
Yeah.
That's success.
Yeah.
So I hope that's helpful. I hope that's
I'm sure, wow, and thank you so much, Joseph, for sharing that and sharing your experiences. I know it's going to be super useful for the people who are listening. I'm sure there'll be people listening who have heard EMDR, maybe like you've said during our conversation today, seen news articles about it and wondered if it might be for them, but not been sure about it. And I think hearing your perspectives and hearing your journey with it, and you know what you brought to this conversation. I know it's going to be really, really valuable for a lot of people. So huge thanks again for your time. Thank you, Monica. Lovely to chat to you again. We'll close there. Thank you. Thank you for listening to It's All Mental, a podcast from Every Turn Mental Health. If you enjoyed this episode, remember to follow, rate and share. See you next time.